So, question time. Tom.
Yes, it's a fascinating talk. I enjoyed it. There's a bit of telepathy going on at the end there, because I was wondering, you work in a fascinating and complex area, so there's a challenge there. And you come up and said, this is my mistake, just as I was wondering, have you ever had mistakes? Because you've got quite a body of work behind you. When do you know when to step forward and take it forward? Because we all look for continuous improvement. In my job, it's very easy. It's when people say that's not very good. I was just wondering how you did it in yours.
You just sort of know when it's right. It's not as I can't really say much more than that. It's to do with form, process, texture, and how it sits. If it's a flat piece of work, how it sits on the paper. You know when it's wrong. Maybe you know when it's wrong more than when you know when it's right.
Would you ever destroy work?
Yeah.
You have been.
Yeah. I put it all in the recycling the other week. It's a real liberation. You shouldn't hang on to anything. Well, that's what I feel about work. No, you know when it works, and it never. The process. Why I talk about muses is, and it's a good question, because the process of getting there for me always involves a sort of obsession with an idea. I chase the knowledge around that idea, then I start to explore it with process, and then when it's right, it's easy. It might have taken me a year to get there, but when it's just rolling, it sort of feels nearly too easy because it's right. And then when it's wrong, it's dreadfully wrong.
And do you pay much attention to feedback?
Maybe not really. No, but I love it when people get it and love what I do. I love it when they see something into it that I had no sense of what it was. The big epilepsy portraits, when the NPG curator came round, she said, "Oh, they're 3 crucifixions." And I'd never thought about it, but I had photographed everyone's hands and feet, and that was part of what I did, and they're laid out in a very formal way. So people sometimes find much more meaning in your work than you mean to be there. I like that. I think it's great.
How do you fit that thing about putting them in the bin with saying the mistakes are the best bit of it?
Because there's good mistakes and bad mistakes. The mistakes that happen through the process early on are the exciting bits. The bad mistakes are usually when I'm overthinking something and it's really forced and it's really dull and it just doesn't work, and then it goes in the bin. I treasure the good mistakes because they're left field and they take you in another direction.
Have you ever sort of wanted, or have you explored the sort of the difference, the sort of disconnect between the sort of schizoid split, I guess, when looking at schizophrenia subjects, between, in technique, because I often people feel that etching is a very sort of interior, that it's quite an autographic mark making as well as lithography as well. Have you ever wanted sort of to explore that sort of difference between the idea of sort of objectifying a patient almost as a psychologist, and also the idea of you interviewing patients and understanding their feelings about. Have you ever wanted to sort of explore it from both angles, the sort of objectivity of categorising, typologising illnesses, and also the actual person who is
explore it through
technique.
Through technique.
Sort of wanted to
well, I think that's where the drawing without eyes, without hands, the eye drawings were a bit about that, because I wanted to know when the people I'm working with schizophrenia, I've got their narratives and I'm very close to them and very protective of them. I've also got neuroscientific narratives of what's going on in the brain. I've got clinicians' narratives, and I've got stories of heavy medication and what it feels like to never quite feel awake, to have your perception broken up because of the way the links are between your brain and your visual systems. So I'm desperate to get inside it. I don't know how to, because, you know, that's the whole thing about consciousness. You're just locked into yourself. But those narratives and what's been great about the schizophrenia project has been to sit and work with these two artists with schizophrenia, and we all work in the same studio together, often drawing each other, because that seems to me quite an interesting way of trying to see how we're all seeing things differently. I get as close as I can, but in the end it's anecdotal. I can't really get there. But I can make work that might question prejudice, I think.
Yes. And have you ever consulted with psychologists as part of your work, you know, as a sort of another angle?
Well, in terms of the drawings being a vehicle for exploring, like art therapy, I have done. I sort of no, I don't. I feel that is not my business. I feel very strongly that art therapy is a great, strong, and a very, very good thing, but it's private between the therapist and the patient. I don't want to know more than a human relationship lets me know, if you know what I mean. I don't want to be involved in any diagnostic stuff. It's not my business. That's a bit of a double talk, I know.
There's two questions. Shall we take the question from the gentleman in the back?
When you're working with the schizophrenic artists, have you ever almost used art as experiment in itself? I mean, could you all three try to draw your most accurate representation of the same thing and learn a scientific truth?
Yeah,
as well?
no, we've been experimenting. I mean, that's why the eye tracking experiment happened, but I can't get permission to take them into the eye tracking lab, because I thought if there wasn't the intervention of hands, and we were all looking at the same face and trying to draw it with our eyes, that maybe I would get insight into the perceptual differences, and there are perceptual differences. One of the artists just sees out of the corner, so he's drawing, where I would look straight on, he has to look sideways. Camille, whose portrait you saw there, says that she looks at the world through a diamond, and I can't. So I wondered if the eye tracking might be a wonder, and I still hope to do that, a wonderful way of the three of us coming together by, your technique as an artist mediates between how you show your perceptions. If you're a very good drawer, you can represent what you want to do, and if you're not a good drawer, you can't. So I just wondered if eye tracking would not only tell me about how they see the world, but it might also show me how they keep going back to one place because they get stuck in the details. So it needs to be pushed much further. It would be fascinating to do it.
So, question from Max, and then Helen, and then Ruth, and then Tom. So, Max first.
Thank you. Thanks, Stuart. I really liked the talk. You mentioned that you were given an Arts Council grant to go for 2 months to do one picture, and you ended up doing 15. And I just wondered whether you could say something about the importance of speed in your work,
In my work.
in relation to process.
Yeah, I do work very fast. I like my work to look as if it's thrown itself on the paper and it might disappear in a moment. I think that's to do with, it's sort of a philosophical position in a way, because I think experience, the woman who woke up this morning who was Susan Aldworth is no longer in that bed. I'm here now, and I won't be here later on in this experience. You live in the moment, and I think in a way I always want my work to be in the moment, and maybe that's why I don't mind binning it as well, because that moment's gone as well. I do work fast, but I do, even though I produce 15 pictures at the Kerwin Gallery, I was working sort of 23-hour days to do it, so it's hugely labour intensive, even though it's very fast. Does that answer the question?
The questions relate a little bit in a way to that question from Max, which is, I'm quite curious about the relationship between drawing and printmaking in your work, because it's a very mark-making kind of practice. But what I get happens with printmaking is there are all sorts of areas for accidents and unpredictable things to happen, much more so than drawing in a way. And whether that's one of the things that you love about printmaking, that there's a kind of an alchemy.
Yeah.
There are a number of steps, and at every step along the way, something unexpected can happen that you respond to. And that seems really important in your practice.
It's a great question. Yeah, the alchemy of printmaking is something I'm passionate about. And for me, printmaking is often a secondary art form for a lot of artists. For me, it's my major art form, because only through printmaking have I ever been able to achieve the marks that I want. Serendipity is a huge part of what I love. Most printmaking is in reverse. I mean, lithography isn't, but etching, you make a metal plate and you print it, and the image comes out backwards. And I never quite plan for that, because I love that as well. The temperature makes a huge difference to your work. How the inks are, when I work in the studio in the summer, the work is much more fluent. The blacks are heavier because the chemistry of the air is different. And in the winter, the inks go hard, so everything has a sort of sharper edge. So that all sort of builds into the process of it. So yeah, print affords me an alchemy. I'm very technical, I know my stuff, but I also love it to sort of take off on its own. Like when you're putting an etching plate in acid, someone's told you it's 4:1 strength, but it might have evaporated, it might have been a hot night, someone might have thrown their tea in it without telling you, all sorts of things change it, and so the etch is different, so the marks are different. So you're only in control at the drawing stage, and then it takes off. I love it. And paper surfaces, oh God, don't get me going. I mean, paper surface, again, the way a picture hangs on the paper is something, again, I absolutely love. And Stanley, who I work with at the Cohen Press, he's as obsessive about it as I am. And he invented Somerset, which is the great printmaker's paper. And when he told me that, I just sort of fell on my knees in worship. This guy invented a paper that doesn't stretch in the etching press. I can't tell you how important that is.
Ruth.
Yeah, I want to ask about the relation between this tunnel vision and that woman who's saying, she can't see the garden because she can only see one bird. That happens to me all the time, actually. I mean, and I think it happens to a lot of people.
Yeah.
You're just focusing on one thing. And it happened to Darwin, and I want to relate that to your thing about what if. Because Darwin had that what if all the time. That was what he worked on, worked with. And there's a wonderful letter in about 1837 when he's lying on his back in Kensington Gardens. He writes a letter and said, much exercised by looking up at a tree and seeing it as a whole organic animal. And I think that capacity to do the two things, to have the tunnel vision and see only the bird, but also to think, what if, I suppose we're treading in Ronald Lang territory here, and the way that his idea that the schizophrenic actually sees something more truly, or truly in a new way. But Darwin was always thinking, what if? What if I could paint the bees? And then he got his children to go and paint the bumblebees and dab little things on them. And he realised that bumblebees, how actually they move, they mate, they go on, what the thing is. And it seems to me that what if, I mean, that's metaphor, which is one of the things you didn't talk about. News is fine, and as we said
metaphor
earlier,
is
it's a
hugely important.
masculinist thing, but it's this sort of inspiration, sexualized inspiration. But you're not talking about sexualized inspiration, you're talking about the springs of metaphor.
Yeah. No, I am. The tunnel, I mean, one of the reasons I'm interested in the schizophrenia is this sort of tunnel vision. I mean, obviously it is a spectrum, and I feel on that, I'm sure we all feel on that spectrum. And, I love contemplating the little bit. And one of the things I teach at art school one day a week, and one of the things I feel my duty as a teacher is to get rid of the editing devices that we get through our lives of how to look. And that in a sense, being able to concentrate on something so long that it becomes something that you really understand is good. I think that the problem for schizophrenia, from what I've talked about to the two artists I'm working with, is that they get caught in a universe which everything has huge significance. It's a bit like being, so they can't see the wood for the trees, and that makes the world a very frightening place, I think.
Yes,
because
you really, really need to see the trees.
Yeah, you can't edit out you know, the difference between everyone walking towards you, and you can't see the difference between that and the person with the axe, because it, you know, you get, everything seems important. And they talk in schizophrenia about negative and positive symptoms, and I think that's sort of also a metaphor for negative and positive feelings about, that they seem to have very strong feelings that people are either good or evil, that there's a guardian angel behind someone or a devil. It's very, it's been an extraordinary eye-opener as a project in terms of human condition and the terror of being labelled something. I mean, I think that that's something I feel extraordinarily strongly, that you get a schizophrenia label, and not only is your life difficult anyway, but everyone doesn't want to know you. It's a difficult world.
Sorry, just a moment, Tom, and then you, sorry.
Yes, Susan. I find your sort of honesty about your work very refreshing, and you work within the same sort of subject area, which is what I call bioscience, or bioart rather. But you've been honest enough to say that a lot of your work you just get thrown in the bin, but a lot of it succeeds. And I'm wondering, does it succeed because as you change topic, do you carry on with process, you mentioned process as a muse, or do you start with a fresh book and do a bit of research on that topic and start again?
What, when it goes down a dead alley?
Well, I'm on that, sorry, I didn't express it well. When you're changing topic, when you're going from one area
to another.
Yeah, to another.
I mean, a lot of it is financial. I get paid to change from one topic to another, and I have to survive as an artist. To me, all the strand of human identity goes through it all. I can't do work that I'm not passionate about.
No, I was asking whether your starting point from when you go from schizophrenia to another topic, do you just pick up what you learned from schizophrenia and you still got the same process and you use it on the next topic? Or do you go along to the next topic, do a bit of research on it and start again and with a blank page?
I mean, both of those things are true. I take everything with me and I find new things as well.
You come back to different subject matter, you don't walk away from a subject.
Yeah, no. And also, in terms of technique, I have quite a strong voice with my work, so, you know, the bits of it I always take forward, like working in negative line, because it's sort of, I find it really beautiful.
Like everything in life, everything's grey.
Yeah.
Your question?
I guess I have two parts to my question. One is you talk about trying to understand the differences between the way you might see the world and the way the artists who have schizophrenia see the world through doing the drawings with your eyes. Have you ever thought that perhaps the mistakes that you talk about making might show something interesting? Their mistakes might be different to your mistakes, and perhaps that kind of unconscious action when you're painting that isn't intended could show something interesting. And the other question that kind of relates to that as well is about this this idea of significance and salience in the world, and about schizophrenics kind of. There's a huge malfunction in the brain that makes certain things really important when they're not. And the idea then is that that's terrifying because they don't understand why, and so they make up this story to explain why. So, for example, I know the salt cellar is in one position and they decide they're the Pope because they don't understand the importance of it. Perhaps does the drawing of the artists you work with reflect that kind of distorted logic or eagerness to create a logic out of something? There's two questions, really.
Questions. I've no idea when another artist makes a mistake, so I couldn't judge the mistakes because I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
In terms of the second question, I'm going to have to sort of rethink where we're going. A lot of schizophrenia, the complications of living is because you might sometimes have 4 or 5 different voices talking to you. And if you've ever been in a crowded room and you're trying to concentrate on a thought and you imagine that as your lifestyle, then I think the fact that they do come, and I think they do come and work and do pictures with me is extraordinary because they've got a lot of other stuff telling them to do other, so it's not a quiet moment, although they do say the art is quiet. And interestingly, Kevin, one of the artists I work with, he went to France to take his kids to Disneyland, and he said it's great the voices weren't there because they don't speak French. So I said to him, why don't you go and live in France? And he said he'd miss them.
I think we've got time for 2 or 3 more questions. Is anyone who hasn't asked a question would like to ask another one?
You mentioned the process of the night through, and it's extremely interesting. At what point do you decide which process you're going to apply for delivering the idea you are really chasing, and you're almost there, and when is the moment that you decide on the medium? And there is this historical aspect of you being a printmaker, and now you're coming with this. When do you make this decision? What leads to it, and how do you feel about trying out new medium, new things?
No, it's a very good question. It's always history. I mean, I know I'm comfortable with etching, so it's a good place to start. I do a lot of written thinking. I do a lot of drawings, and there's usually a morning when I wake up and I know where I want to go with it. I know what I want the marks to look like the lithographic marks. I know what I want to look like with them. I've got a new project I'm doing on downs, and I know that needs to be lithography because I can't. It's also process, because something like lithography I've learned is to do with layering very thin colours, a bit like watercolour, so you can build up lots of mass on it. Etching is very glutinous in a way. It's not a great medium to work in for me to layer things because the transparency is different. So I get an idea of what I want to show and where the marks are going to come from. But I'm always curious. I mean, there's certain processes I've never worked in. I've not done stone lithography yet, and I think the next project I want to do is stone lithography because I think I've seen the marks there that I want to get. So it's partly, a lot of it is just sort of blind faith. But there are certain techniques I know I can make my work in.
Oh, sorry, ladies first, then Gary.
Mine was just a brief question. You've worked with people with schizophrenia. Have you ever worked with people with more neurological disorders? I mean, this relates to something we're talking about separately, but I just wanted to know whether you had and what that showed.
I've worked with people with Alzheimer's, but more taking art projects in to see what effect it had on their capacities, and it was amazing. I mean, I took musicians in, and I took artists and photographers in. I don't know. I've not analysed their work in that sense ever. It's not. I mean, my interest is always in who they are, and I actually prefer it when I don't have a diagnosis. I think that I just have big problems with labels.
Just got a question. You inspired by etchings from past etchers, or is that part of your work?
Yeah, I mean, Goya is a huge hero of mine. More than that, big passion of mine. I love Goya's etchings. I love. No, he's my big passion in etching. I'm afraid, yeah. But I love.
Speechless.
Yeah, it is. I'm sorry. He's my man.
Julia.
And on that note, would you be interested in exploring aquatint in the way that Goya has as another new media? Or
Well,
another
I've done a lot of
essentially?
aquatint with Nigel, and we do handshake. The picture of me in the plastic bag was because he was handshaking a Goya aquatint
Wow.
onto my hands so that we could get the sense of a hand coming through. So I've started experimenting a lot, and the aquatint is a delicious thing, as I'm sure you know.
One last question, everybody?
Yeah, I'm just thinking what Goya wrote on this thing about the disasters of war. He wrote, I saw it, and this too. And that's what you're saying, really.
I think we have to end there.
Thank you very much, everyone. I just asked Susan, just for one more minute, Susan could just tell us a bit about some of her forthcoming exhibitions, including the National Portrait Gallery that you touched upon.
Yeah,
There's 2 shows in Newcastle, isn't there?
Yeah. The show about schizophrenia is opening on 2 sites, which I'm very excited about, given the sort of myth about split personality. In Newcastle, it opens on September the 19th at the Hatton Gallery, which is at Newcastle University, and a very lovely contemporary gallery there called Vane. And it will show works both by me and by Kevin and Camille, and some other, some sound artists and a neon artist as well. And then the National Portrait Gallery opens in February 2013 and will be on the wall for 8 months.
And of course, Susan's been our summer show, Coming of Age, a group show about ageing in a positive way. Thank you very much.